And I think the issue is, what are disputes that you can take on with China? Because there are disputes between the US and China that are real, that are substantive. There are certain trade practices that China prosecutes. These flybys near Taiwan are not positive. The intrusions in the South China Sea with ASEAN states are not constructive. But nevertheless, what are the issues that the US should see as red zones? Every nation has their, let's say, concentric circles of interests. Certain interests are at the heart of a nation. For example, territorial claims, especially if they have some historical basis. I mean, it's a fact that Taiwan many years ago was a part of China. No matter how you conceive of China, it was
that's undeniable. Yeah,
very hard to say it wasn't. Of course, that doesn't mean that the Chinese position is correct or anything like that. But the point is, this is a core sensitive issue for the Chinese people in a way that is different from, let's say, unfair trade practices as an issue. Unfair trade practices can be negotiated. From the Chinese standpoint, the status of Taiwan cannot be. From the US standpoint, Taiwan is a very distant island that is an interest. But the question is how vital an interest it is. Is it vital to the point where you can flirt with war or conflict over it? I mean, if this were happening in Hawaii, of course it would be. If the Chinese or any power were intruding in Hawaii, for example, or Guam, the US would feel extremely threatened. Taiwan is not the same, but nevertheless, from the Chinese perspective, which is, by the way, shared by many Chinese citizens. This is not just the Communist Party of China. It is sensitive. So not to accept the Chinese version of history, but to understand that this issue can easily escalate.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, every country, you're right, has got red lines. For example, when it comes to India, you better be careful before you say anything on Kashmir.
Indeed.
Because Kashmir is of such a vital national interest to India. And I know how sensitive it was when Singapore was a member of the UN Security Council. Ireland tried to bring it up. I think Ireland got his head bashed.
It's very sensitive.
Which is fully what I expected, completely, yeah. But I want to end, it's amazing, time flies. We've already completed 45 minutes of our wonderful discussion. Frankly, the best contribution that this discussion has made is actually to bring out the complexity of all these issues, which doesn't come through in the black and white reporting that you get in the Anglo-Saxon media on many of these issues. This is why I hope the Asian peace talks are making a contribution. But I want to end on an optimistic note, because I do think that there are still many areas in which the US and China could be collaborating with one another, where actually it would serve their larger interests as well as the larger interests of humanity as a whole, for the United States and China to actually collaborate in some areas. And I know that you've been writing about this, Sarang, in the past. Do you want to share with our audience how you think we can persuade the United States and China, even while they continue to compete, to maybe perhaps spend as much time cooperating in areas where there is their mutual interest to do so? So what would you give as advice for the areas of cooperation?
We have talked a lot about geopolitics, but there are, of course, dynamics happening on the planet that are of grave concern and indeed are great threats. The most important one is climate change. Along with that is pandemics, and we have experienced the pandemics in the last 2 years. These are areas where nationalism, and I would even say national identity, reaches its limits, because these phenomena are so thoroughly planetary in nature, so completely suffuse national borders, and are so urgent and grave that their solution can only come from cooperation. Competition, while yes, certain technologies benefit from market competition, that's always welcomed. But in a governmental policy sense, there has to be cooperation. So I would put the first item as these planetary systemic threats. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this also includes things like global financial stability.
Of course,
when the Fed does something or the Chinese central bank does something else, whether it's crypto, whether it's interest rates, what have you, there are conversations on these that happen. But these are areas that need to be more front and central in cooperation. On climate change, particularly in Asia, it is one of the most threatened continents on climate change. When you look at South Asia, when you look at the Mekong Delta, when you look at Myanmar, when you look at the Philippines, if you spin the current natural disasters out by 10, 15, 20 years, we are dealing with substantial economic impacts on supply chains, on manufacturing. And there is all the reason for the United States, with the sort of capacities it has in the region of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and indeed Chinese capacities that have become much more stronger now, to proactively say, not just make a statement that we will cooperate when necessary and then sort of forget it, but actually put meat on the bones. To actually say, let us have a summit focused on climate cooperation. Let us not just talk about mitigation in terms of telling China to not use coal, but actually revive our technological cooperation. For example, the energy cooperation that US and China had, they had a center set up that's gone sort of moribund. Innovate in things like carbon capture, removing carbon from the air, hydrogen. There are many technologies that we know are doable, but whether they come into the market 20 years from now or 7 years from now makes all the difference on controlling mitigation. This is where the best scientists and technologists from two countries, and indeed others, should collaborate to bring solutions to bear to the global market. And let there be a self-interest component to it, of course, as well. So I see climate change not just as something to avoid bad things, but also to innovate new products, new markets, to give hope for the young, for both countries, to create new careers, and indeed improve our quality of life. I mean, if you have more biking lanes, you have better, less toxic products. There's a range of spin-offs from tackling climate change. And the US and China are the two world's biggest polluters. So if they don't come together, who else is going to do it?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you emphasize that in many key areas, the United States and China actually have common interests, especially in terms of dealing with the common planetary challenges. I must say, I want to thank you very much, Sarang. This has been an excellent discussion. I think one thing we realized in the Asian Peace Program is that achieving peace is actually a very difficult and complex exercise. And in our discussion, I think, has in many ways brought out all the difficulties and complexities of the issues that we have to deal with. And by so doing, I think we are making a major contribution. And for that, I thank you very much for coming all the way from Washington, D.C. to Singapore to participate in this discussion of the Asian Peace Program. I also want to conclude by thanking my friends and colleagues, the supporters of the Asian Peace Programs, and of course, the very strong, dedicated team I have. And I want to especially mention Dr. Varigonda Kesavachandra, Bertrand Sia, and Kristen Tang for their contributions towards creating this podcast series of the Asian Peace Program. Thank you very much, Sarang.
Thank you, Kishore. And I really appreciate all the work the Asian Peace Program is doing, and I wish it and you and your team all the best.
Thank you.